A young woman surrounded by luxury and secrets finds herself cornered by an invisible threat. When everything else fails, her last tie to the past unleashes a power no one saw coming. The morning in Silveridge Valley awakened shrouded in mist, as if nature was preparing a veil over the secrets that dwelled there. Lauren adjusted her dark glasses while waiting in the hotel lobby. Her fingers drummed gently on her folding cane, not out of nervousness, but as a way of feeling the vibrations around her. At 28, she had transformed her condition into a professional advantage. "Miss Lauren," Harrison Adams' deep yet velvety voice filled the space. "I hope I'm not late." Punctual as a Swiss watch, she smiled, extending her hand in the air with impressive precision. "My ears caught your car exactly 3 minutes ago." Harrison held her hand with controlled firmness, a gesture that Lauren interpreted as admiration mixed with curiosity. It was common for people to underestimate her abilities, but the businessman seemed genuinely intrigued. "Your work at the symposium on neuroplasticity deeply impressed me," he commented, gently guiding her outside. "The way you mapped the brain, regions that expand in blind people, revolutionary." Lauren felt the warmth of the sun touch her face when they left. The aroma of damp earth and dense vegetation invaded her nostrils, an olfactory map she loved to decipher. "The human brain is fascinating, Harrison. When one sense disappears, the others don't just compensate, they create new possibilities." She adjusted the small backpack on her shoulders. "But you didn't bring me all the way here just to praise my research, did you?" The path they followed was uneven. Lauren perceived the change in the texture of the ground, from the smooth stones of the hotel sidewalk to beaten earth, then to dry leaves and fallen branches. They were entering a trail. "As perceptive as I imagined," he laughed, a sound too calculated to be spontaneous. "There's a place here, a special viewpoint. No tourist knows about it. I believe it will be perfect for testing your theory on expanded spatial perception." The wind blew stronger, bringing with it the distant song of a catbird. That sound was rare at that time of year. Something seemed out of place. "And how did you discover such a special place?" she inquired, disguising her sudden apprehension. "Let's say that land investments lead me to discover spots that even local residents don't explore." He paused. "Fascinating how nature hides its treasures, don't you think?" As they advanced, along the trail, the conversations of the past weeks echoed in Lauren's mind. The meeting at the symposium, the exchanged emails, the increasingly frequent phone calls. Harrison had emerged as a benefactor, interested in financing her research on how blind people developed precise mental maps of spaces they had never seen. "You know, Lauren, your work can go beyond academia," his voice lowered, becoming almost confidential. "Imagine security systems based on non-visual perception, navigation technologies for hostile environments, military applications." "My research aims for inclusion, Harrison, not surveillance," she replied firmly, feeling a subtle change in his behavior. "Inclusion, surveillance, and they're just different sides of the same coin," he answered, his tone now less warm. "In the end, it all comes down to capturing information that others can't perceive." The incline of the terrain increased, and Lauren felt the air becoming thinner. They were climbing. Her ears picked up a strange silence, not the usual silence, of the forest, filled with small sounds, but a disturbing emptiness, as if the wildlife knew something she hadn't yet realized. "It's very quiet here," she commented, trying to keep her voice casual. "That's the magic of this place," Harrison responded, but his breathing had changed faster now, not from physical exertion. "We're almost at the viewpoint. You'll be able to feel the vastness of the valley even without seeing it." The metallic smell that didn't belong in that natural environment began to bother Lauren. It was like iron exposed to the elements, or something else. Something like sweaty fear. She discreetly pressed the button on the small device in her pocket, a safety habit she had adopted since she began traveling alone for her research. "How long have we been walking?" she asked, trying to calculate the distance from the hotel. "Long enough," Harrison replied, his voice now stripped of its initial cordiality. "If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The wind whipped stronger, bringing an aroma of distant storm. Lauren felt the change in air pressure, the electricity announcing rain, but there was something more urgent that concerned her. Harrison's fingers on her arm had transformed into claws. "We've arrived," he announced with a coldness that made Lauren shudder. The sound around had changed drastically. The echo of their voices indicated an open space ahead, without trees to muffle the sound. The wind howled with more freedom, and the smell of earth and exposed rock became more intense. They were at the edge of something. "A viewpoint, you said," Lauren commented, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "It must be an impressive view." "It's a view that few have had the privilege to contemplate," Harrison responded, "especially from the angle you're going to experience." The threatening tone no longer left any doubts. Lauren tried to back away, but the grip on her arm intensified. Her other senses worked frantically. Harrison's accelerated breathing, the cold sweat emanating from him, the sound of small stones falling into an apparent void in front of them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, buying time while trying to orient herself. "I thought you were interested in my research." "And I am," Harrison gave a dry laugh, "but not in the way you imagine. Your work is too valuable to be restricted to academic publications and inspiring talks. There are people willing to pay fortunes for practical applications of what you've discovered. You want to steal my research?" Lauren tried to move away again. "Don't be naive." He pulled her closer to the edge, causing small rocks to roll into the abyss. "You're not the first person with special abilities I've found, but you are without a doubt the most brilliant. That's why I tried to convince you to work with me voluntarily." Lauren felt the uneven ground beneath her feet, the edge of the precipice ever closer. Her heart raced, but her mind worked with clarity. Years of adapting to blindness had taught her to stay calm in dangerous situations. "So this is your recruitment method?" she provoked, trying to distract him. "It doesn't seem very efficient." "For those who agree to collaborate, the method is quite different," he responded with indifference. "But for those who refuse, well, accidents happen every day on dangerous trails, don't they?" A distant thunder reverberated through the valley, as if nature protested against what was about to happen. Lauren felt the first drop of rain touch her face. The weather was changing, just like her luck. "Other people know I'm here with you," she bluffed. "No, they don't," Harrison retorted with confidence. "You're meticulous in your independence, Lauren. It's what impressed me most about you. And what made all this easier?" In a quick movement, he pushed her. Lauren felt the emptiness beneath her feet, gravity pulling her body downward. For a terrible moment, there was only air around her, the sound of wind in her ears and the sensation of free fall. Her scream echoed through the ravine. Then a violent jerk interrupted the fall. Her dress had caught on something, a branch, a protrusion in the rock she couldn't identify. The pain in her shoulder was excruciating, probably dislocated by the sudden halt. Hanging in the void, Lauren heard Harrison's footsteps rapidly moving away. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice seemed small against the immensity of the place. The core. Fabric began to tear slowly. Each second hanging was torture for her injured shoulder, but also a chance of survival. She tried to calm herself and assess the situation. The more she struggled, the faster the fabric would give way. She needed to think. The wind brought sounds from the bottom of the valley, not just the expected noises of the forest, but something different, something large moving down there. A sound of hooves, heavy and determined, accompanied by deep breathing, almost like snorting. "Is anyone there?" she called, a mixture of hope and fear in her voice. The sound of hooves approached. It wasn't the sound of horses, which Lauren knew well from her childhood visits to farms. It was heavier, more deliberate, and there was that distinct smell, earthy, animal, wild, but somehow not threatening. The dress continued to give way, thread by thread. The rain began to fall with more intensity, making everything more dangerous. The rocks below would be slippery. Whatever awaited her down there would be even riskier with the storm. Suddenly the fabric tore completely. Lauren felt her stomach sink with the resumed fall. It was only a few seconds of terror until her body hit something. Not the hard rock she expected, but a firm yet soft surface covered with thick, warm fur. The impact, though cushioned, was enough to leave her breathless for a moment. A powerful snort enveloped her in moist heat. Lauren extended a trembling hand and touched what appeared to be the back of an enormous animal. The fur was dense, the skin underneath vibrating with powerful muscles. It wasn't a horse nor a cow, it was larger, more robust. "A buffalo?" she whispered, incredulous. The animal moved slightly as if to adjust her on its back. It seemed impossible, but it had positioned itself exactly where she would fall. As if it knew, as if it were waiting. The rain intensified, washing away the sweat and blood from the scratches on eye. Her skin, her shoulder hurt terribly, and her legs trembled with the shock of the near tragedy, but Lauren was alive. Clinging to the fur of the mysterious animal, she realized that her nightmare was just beginning. The rain formed a liquid curtain. Around them, transforming sounds and smells into a complex sensory map that Lauren struggled to decipher. The buffalo moved with surprising gentleness, each step calculated to avoid unbalancing its injured passenger. "Where are we going?" murmured Lauren, more to herself than to the animal. The pain in her shoulder pulsated, making it difficult to maintain balance. With her good hand, she firmly gripped the buffalo's thick fur, feeling the comforting warmth emanate from the massive body. The animal seemed to follow a specific path, avoiding obstacles with a precision that didn't seem natural. The storm gradually diminished, allowing other forest sounds to manifest again. Birds sang timidly, as if testing whether the danger had passed. Water trickled down the leaves of the trees, creating a symphony of drips on different surfaces that Lauren could clearly distinguish. Her hearing, always sharp, now worked feverishly to map the surroundings. After what seemed like hours, the buffalo stopped. Lauren sensed a different aroma in the air, wet moss, damp stone, and something else, a soft fragrance of flowers she couldn't identify. The sound around indicated a partially covered space, like a cave or natural shelter. The echo of drops falling into a nearby puddle confirmed her impression. "Is this where you live, big guy?" she asked, letting out a groan when she tried to move. The buffalo emitted a low sound, almost like a response. It slowly bent down, allowing Lauren to slide to the ground with relative ease. The surface under her feet was smooth, stone polished by time and water. Carefully, she explored the space around with her free hand, confirming they were in a kind of shallow grotto. "Who are you?" she whispered, caressing the muzzle of the animal that had approached. "And why did you save me?" The buffalo snorted softly, its warm breath against Lauren's cold skin. There was something about that animal that transcended the ordinary. The way it had appeared at the exact moment, as if guided by some greater purpose. Lauren felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "Silverback," she murmured, suddenly remembering a story. "That's what they call you, isn't it?" During her research in the region, Lauren had interviewed several local residents, recording their narratives about how they perceived the environment without relying on vision. An elderly man had mentioned the legend of Silverback, a solitary buffalo that roamed the forgotten trails of Silveridge Valley, appearing only to those in great danger. Many laughed at the story, considering it just another regional folklore. No one really believed in the animal's existence. "I thought you were just a legend," she smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. "But you're quite real, aren't you?" "Silverback," responded with another snort, stronger this time. His huge body blocked the entrance to the small grotto, protecting Lauren from the wind that was beginning to blow again outside. With effort, she tried to assess her injuries. The shoulder was certainly dislocated, and several cuts and abrasions burned in contact with the air. She needed medical help, but she was lost in the middle of Silveridge Valley, far from any known trail. And there was Harrison. What would he do upon discovering she had survived? Would he return to finish the job, or would he simply disappear, confident that nature would complete what he had started? "I need to understand what's happening," she spoke out loud, organizing her thoughts. "Why would he do this? What's so valuable about my research?" Her scientific mind worked even in crisis. In recent years, her work had focused on how blind people developed extraordinary sensory abilities. It wasn't just neurological compensation, as many believed, but something deeper, a different way of processing environmental information. Lauren had mapped how the brain created complex spatial representations without visual input, reaching impressive results. Military applications, she murmured, recalling Harrison's insinuations, security systems, espionage. The revelation hit her like lightning. Her method could be used to train people to detect what conventional cameras and sensors couldn't capture. It could revolutionize surveillance and intelligence systems. Other disappearances, she continued, mentally connecting dots. He mentioned I'm not the first. There must be a pattern. Silverback moved restlessly, as if responding to her thoughts. The animal seemed to understand more than should be possible for an ordinary buffalo. Ignoring the pain, Lauren felt her pockets, searching for her cell phone. As expected, it was no longer there. Probably lost during the fall or damaged by water. The small emergency device in her other pocket had also disappeared. "We're on our own, friend," she sighed. The sky outside was beginning to darken. If her perception of time was correct, night would fall in a few hours. The temperature was already decreasing, and her shivering intensified. With the injured shoulder and without equipment, her chances of survival drastically diminished. As if reading her thoughts, Silverback approached even closer, offering the warmth of his body. Lauren leaned against him, grateful. "If you know these woods as well as they say, we'll need to work together to get out of here," she spoke, surprising herself with the naturalness with which she conversed with the animal. "Tomorrow, when the sun rises, can you guide me to somewhere safe?" The buffalo responded with a gentle movement of his head, which Lauren felt against her body. It was as if he truly understood every word. "Meanwhile, I need to rest and think," she continued. "Someone must be looking for me now. The problem is knowing if they're friends or more people like Harrison." Outside, night finally fell over the valley. In the silence of the grotto, protected by the unlikely guardian, Lauren allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears ran down her face as the reality of her situation hit her with full force. Joe Bennett left his small house on the edge of the village in the morning mist that had not yet completely dissipated. At 65 years of age, with more than 50 dedicated to knowing every rock and tree in Silveridge Valley, the old guide carried on his sun-marked face the knowledge that no map could contain. His steps were slow but precise as he walked to the meeting point of the tourist trails. The village was bustling that morning. Groups of people spoke in low voices in front of the sheriff's office, and the environmental police truck was parked next to the only hotel in the region. "What happened?" "Tony," asked Joe as he approached a young man organizing hiking equipment on the porch of his store. "A researcher disappeared," the young man replied, adjusting the pile of backpacks. "That blind woman who came to do studies in the region, remember? She went out yesterday with a businessman and didn't return." Joe Bennett frowned, remembering the woman. He had seen her a few times during her research, always accompanied by different local residents whom she interviewed. She impressed everyone with her ability to orient herself in unfamiliar environments. "Which businessman?" he asked, a bad feeling growing in his chest. "That conservation project guy Adams, Harrison Adams. He came back alone yesterday afternoon, all wet from the rain, saying they got separated during the storm." Joe Bennett felt his blood freeze in his veins. He knew Harrison, not personally, but by reputation. He had heard stories about his questionable practices in other environmental preservation regions. There were rumors that his conservation projects were just facades for other interests. "Where did he say they got separated?" the old guide asked, his voice firmer. "He said something about the Leap Trail, but the police already checked and found nothing." Tony lowered his voice. "Between us, Joe, that trail is no place to take a blind person, even if she's as independent as they say she is." Joe nodded gravely. The Leap Trail was dangerous even for experienced hikers, with its steep edges and slippery rocks. Something in that story didn't make sense. "Who's coordinating the search?" he asked, adjusting the straw hat he rarely took off his head. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, from Environmental, but they're waiting for reinforcements from Washington, D.C. Without saying more, Joe Bennett headed to the sheriff's office. The small building was packed with police officers, volunteers, and curious onlookers. In the corner of the main room, a tall man in a suit, despite the heat, was conversing with authorities. His gestures were theatrically concerned, but his eyes remained cold. It must be Harrison Adams. "Excuse me, Lieutenant." Joe approached, the officer who seemed to be commanding the operation. "I can help with the search. I know every trail in this valley." Lieutenant Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with rigid military posture, examined the old guide from head to toe. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Bennett, but we have professional teams. You're already too old to be out there." Joe Bennett wasn't offended. He was used to being underestimated for his simple appearance and advanced age. Instead of insisting, he just nodded respectfully and retreated to a corner of the room, from where he could better observe and hear the conversations. Harrison Adams was reporting his version of the events to a group of officers and the local sheriff. His narrative was fluid, well-rehearsed. "We were exploring the region for a possible sensory research center," he explained with a controlled voice. "Dr. Lauren insisted on seeing the leap trail despite my warnings about the dangers. When the storm began, I suggested we turn back, but she wanted to continue. We separated when I looked for shelter, and she decided to go on." "And you didn't try to stop her?" questioned a police officer. "Of course I tried." Harrison opened his hands in a gesture of powerlessness. "But Dr. Lauren is quite determined. She always insisted on being treated like any person without disabilities. I respected her autonomy, though now I deeply regret it." Joe Bennett contained a snort of disbelief. The story sounded false to his experienced ears. Silently, he left the sheriff's office and walked to his small shed behind his house, where he kept more specific equipment for difficult trails. As he gathered ropes, a canteen, a first aid kit, and his old machete and chiba, idea began to form in his mind. The official leap trail was just one of the possibilities. There were other routes, known only to the oldest residents, that could lead to nearby areas, but completely off the tourist maps. "If I wanted to make someone disappear in the valley, I wouldn't use the marked trails," he murmured to himself, adjusting the backpack on his shoulders. As he left, he almost bumped into a woman who was hurrying along the path. "Mr. Bennett," she exclaimed, regaining her balance, "I was just looking for you." He recognized Claire, a woman of about 40 who had worked in the research laboratory where Lauren developed her studies. She seemed agitated, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept well. "What happened, my dear?" he asked gently. "It's about Lauren." Claire lowered her voice, checking that no one was listening. "There's something strange about this disappearance. I found old emails in the laboratory system from when I was still a secretary there. Messages about a project Lynx Eyes, funded by private funds. Harrison Adams' name appeared as the main investor." Joe Bennett felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of project was it?" "Something about using sensory abilities of blind people for commercial and military purposes." Claire swallowed hard. "And Lauren isn't the first researcher to disappear after working on this project. There were others, in different regions of the country." The old guide looked to the horizon, where the rocky formations of the valley rose imposingly against the sky. Somewhere in that immensity, a woman was fighting to survive. "We're going to need help," he decided. "Do you know Mike's Cowboys?" Claire nodded. "Good," continued Joe. "Go to them and ask them to meet me at the Black River crossing with horses and supplies for at least 3 days. Don't say anything to the police yet. The fewer people who know our steps, the better." "And what are you going to do?" Joe Bennett adjusted his hat and pointed to an almost invisible trail that insinuated itself between dense bushes in the opposite direction to the official searches. "I'm going to follow my instincts, my dear. There are places in this valley that only the old-timers know, and there are stories that few believe." "Like that one about the solitary buffalo?" Claire asked, a half-disbelieving smile on her face. The old guide didn't respond immediately. His gaze scanned the distance, as if he could see beyond the mountains. "There are more mysteries in these fields than people imagine," he finally said, "and if Silverback really exists, he might be Lauren's only hope now." The morning brought new hope for Lauren. Resting next to Silverback's warmth, had restored part of her strength, although her shoulder continued to throb painfully. Carefully, she used water from a small puddle formed by the rain to clean the more superficial wounds. "We need to go, big guy," she murmured to the buffalo, who seemed to understand every word. "I can't just wait for help that might never come." The animal snorted softly as if agreeing, and positioned himself to make it easier for her to climb onto his back. Despite the intense pain, Lauren managed to settle in, using only her good arm to hold on. Silverback began a cautious walk, choosing paths that seemed invisible even to those who could see. His step was firm but gentle, always careful not to unbalance his injured passenger. The morning sun gradually warmed the forest, bringing to life the sounds and aromas that Lauren had learned to interpret as a complex sensory map. "We're going down," she realized, feeling the incline of the terrain and the change in air pressure. "Are you taking me to the village?" As they advanced, something began to bother Lauren. There were marks on the path the buffalo was following. They weren't natural trails, but signs of human passage. Branches broken in a specific way, stones arranged in patterns that would seem random to untrained eyes, but that her heightened tactile perception recognized as intentional. "Someone uses this path," she commented, running her fingers over an engraving in the bark of a tree when Silverback briefly stopped to get his bearings. "Regularly." After approximately an hour of journey, the buffalo stopped completely. The smell and sounds had changed. They were in a small clearing, surrounded by dense vegetation, but with clear signs of recent human presence. Ashes from a fire, fragments of fabric, footprints. Carefully, Lauren slid to the ground. Using her good arm, she explored the environment around her, letting her fingers tell the story that her eyes couldn't see. "This is a camp," she murmured, touching the cold remains of a fire. "But not tourists." Something metallic touched her fingers. Pulling it from the ashes, she realized it was a small child's bracelet, one of those with charms, a piece that didn't match the rest of the site. She put it in her pocket, a weight forming in her chest. "What's happening here, Silverback?" she asked, feeling the buffalo approach and snort softly in her hair. Continuing her exploration, Lauren found more disturbing evidence. Rope marks on the trunk of a large tree, which her sensitive fingers interpreted as signs that someone had been tied there. A notebook, wet from the rain, with pages too stuck together to be leafed through, and most alarming, an area of the soil with a different texture, as if it had been recently dug up and recovered. "Oh my God," she whispered, moving away from that region of the soil. "This isn't just a camp, it's something much worse." Her heart accelerated with the realization. What Harrison had said about her not being the first was beginning to make a terrible sense. Other people had been brought to that remote place, far from curious eyes, far from any possibility of help. Suddenly, a distant sound made Silverback alert. There were human voices still far away but approaching. The large animal moved restlessly, indicating they should leave immediately. "Wait," Lauren asked, quickly collecting the soaked notebook and a piece of fabric that could serve as evidence. "We need to take this." Storing the items in her pockets, she allowed the buffalo to help her climb back onto his back. The voices were closer now, and there was the unmistakable sound of branches being broken under heavy boots. "Let's go, quickly," she whispered. Silverback needed no more encouragement. He darted in a different direction from where they had come, following a path that seemed familiar to him, but completely new to Lauren. The forest sounds changed dramatically as they advanced, indicating they were entering an even more remote region of the valley. The sun was already high in the sky when they finally stopped again. The sound of running water indicated they were near a river or stream. Lauren carefully slid to the ground, thirst now overcoming pain and fear. Guided by the sound, she found the edge of the stream. The water was cold and crystalline on her fingers, a relief for her dry throat. As she drank, her mind worked incessantly, connecting dots, forming an increasingly clear and disturbing picture. "Project Lynx Eyes," she spoke out loud, remembering the emails exchanged with Harrison before accepting his invitation to visit Silveridge. It's not just about sensory research, it's something much bigger. Silverback approached, noisily drinking water beside her. His constant presence was the only comfort in that desolate scenario. They're looking for people with specific sensory abilities, continued Lauren, organizing her thoughts. Not to help them, but to exploit these abilities somehow. Her research work had demonstrated that blind people developed extraordinary capabilities. Some could practice echolocation, almost as precise as bats. Others developed a tactile sensitivity, capable of detecting microscopic differences in textures. And there were those like her who created mental maps so detailed they seemed almost supernatural to outside observers. Military applications, she murmured, recalling Harrison's words. Surveillance, espionage, security. They want to transform these abilities into tools. The buffalo snorted, as if confirming her suspicions. With a gentle movement, he indicated it was time to continue. The danger hadn't passed yet, and staying still for too long wasn't wise. You're right, agreed Lauren, feeling a new determination grow inside her. I'm not just a victim in this story, I'm a witness, and I need to survive to tell what I discovered. With difficulty, she climbed back onto the animal's back. Her shoulder throbbed terribly, but the physical pain now seemed smaller given the urgency of her discoveries. Somewhere, other people like her could be in danger. Let's find help, Silverback, she said firmly. And then, we'll make Harrison. Adams pay for all this. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Joe Bennett, advanced with the determination of someone who knows every rock and bush on the path. His aging body moved with the agility acquired in decades traversing these trails, some so ancient that only the native peoples had used them before him. The Valley held secrets in its rock formations and hidden caves, stories he had heard since childhood, and that now could be the key to finding Lauren. It doesn't make sense, he murmured to himself, analyzing recent marks in the damp soil. Nobody has used this trail for years. The footprints he was following weren't from tourists or official guides. They were marks of expensive urban boots, totally inadequate for the rugged terrain of the region. And there was another detail that intrigued him. At some points, the footprints disappeared completely, as if the person had been carried or had levitated over the muddy terrain. The old guide stopped upon finding a scarf caught in a thorn bush. It was fine, made of silk, with small embroidered initials, L.S., Lauren Simmons. His heart accelerated. He was on the right track. While putting the scarf in his pocket, a distant sound caught his attention. A male voice, then another, both trying to keep a low volume, but audible in the quietness of the forest. Joe quickly crouched behind a rock, his reflexes still sharp despite his age. Two men appeared around the bend in the trail. They weren't wearing official uniforms, but were dressed in tactical, dark clothes and carried equipment that certainly didn't belong to simple volunteer searchers. The boss said to check Camp B, said the taller one, consulting a GPS device. He thinks the animal might have taken her there. Animal? The other responded with disbelief. You really believe this? Story about a magical buffalo? She probably fell into some hole and that's it. Shut up, reprimanded the first. We're not here to question. And after everything we've already seen in this project, one buffalo more or less makes no difference. They passed just a few meters from where Joe was hiding, headed in the opposite direction to what he had planned to take. The old guide waited until they were far enough away before resuming his path, now with even more cautious steps. Buffalo, he whispered, a discreet smile forming on his wrinkled lips. So Silverback really exists. Meanwhile, miles away, Claire arrived breathlessly at the cowboy's ranch. The place was simple, with wooden corrals and a large shed where harnesses and saddles were stored. 5 men were talking animatedly, preparing for another day of work. Mike, she called, approaching the oldest, a man with sun-tanned skin and perceptive eyes. I need to talk to you, it's urgent. In a few minutes, she explained the situation. Lauren's disappearance, the suspicions about Harrison Adams, Joe Bennett's request. And there's more, she added, lowering her voice. I found more information about this project. They're not just studying the heightened senses of blind people, they're creating a training protocol for military applications. What do you mean, girl? Questioned Mike, frowning. Imagine soldiers or spies with the ability to perceive movements, thermal variations, and sounds that no one else can detect, explained Claire. Lauren discovered that the brain can be trained for this, even in people who see normally. Her neural mapping method is revolutionary and very valuable. The cowboys looked at each other, the gravity of the situation evident on their faces. Joe Bennett would never ask for our help if it wasn't really serious, decided Mike. Boys, prepare the horses and provisions. We have a person to find. Less than an hour. 5 horses were saddled and equipped for a rescue journey. Claire, who wasn't experienced in riding, received basic instructions and was placed on the most docile animal in the group. We'll be ready to leave in 10 minutes, informed Mike. But first, I need to warn Sheriff Lawrence. He's not like the other police officers. He grew up here, knows the valley almost as well as Joe. And most importantly, he doesn't let himself be impressed by men in suits. Claire hesitated. Joe said not to tell anyone. Trust me, girl, the old cowboy winked. Lawrence is family, and we're going to need someone with legal authority when we find your friend and those responsible for all this. While Mike made the call, Claire mentally reviewed everything she had discovered. The connections between Project Lynx Eyes and other similar research around the world, the obscure financing, the secret patents registered in the name of Shell, companies, a scientific military empire built on the exploitation of vulnerable but extraordinarily gifted people. I'm ready, she declared, accepting the hat that one of the cowboys offered her to protect herself from the relentless sun of the valley. Sheriff Lawrence's pickup truck parked in front of the ranch almost at the same time they finished. Preparations. He was a middle-aged man with distinct Native American features and a posture that emanated authority without the need for artificial demonstrations. Mike explained briefly, he said, addressing Claire directly. I need you to tell me everything without omitting any detail. As they rode toward the meeting point arranged with Joe Bennett, Claire shared every fragment of information she had gathered. The sheriff listened attentively, asking pointed questions, his face becoming more serious with each revelation. This Harrison Adams, he commented finally, has powerful connections in Washington, D.C. When I arrived at the office this morning, there were already 3 calls from above, instructing us to treat him as a victim in the situation and facilitate his return to the capital. It's more serious than we imagined then, concluded Mike. Much more, agreed the sheriff, but this is my land and nobody disappears with one of our people without answering for it, no matter how many politicians or generals are involved. The group continued at an accelerated pace, aware that every minute could make the difference between life and death for Lauren. On the horizon, the rocky formations of the valley rose imposingly against the blue sky, silent guardians of mysteries, and legends that on that day seemed more real than ever. The sun was beginning its descent on the horizon, coloring the sky of Silveridge Valley with orange tones that Lauren could never see but could feel in the heat gradually diminishing on her skin. Silverback had chosen a path that serpentined between ancient rock formations, creating natural protection against unwanted gazes. The pain in Lauren's shoulder had transformed into a constant throbbing, almost rhythmic, that accompanied each step of the great buffalo. Exhausted, she allowed herself to recline against the powerful neck of the animal, seeking some comfort. "Where are we going, friend?" she murmured, noticing a change in the vegetation around her. The air was becoming more humid, the sound of water more present. Silverback responded with a soft snort, as if wanting to reassure her. His steps, always precise, became even more careful. Lauren perceived they were descending a gentle slope, with the sound of waterfalls intensifying as they advanced. Suddenly, the buffalo stopped. His muscles tensed under Lauren's body, and a tremor ran through the animal like a silent alert. She immediately became alert, sharpening all her senses to identify the danger. First came the smell, human sweat, leather, metal. Then the almost imperceptible sound of experienced steps on dry leaves. Someone was approaching, trying not to be detected but failing for Lauren's extraordinarily developed senses. "Someone's coming," she whispered, squeezing Silverback's fur with her good hand, preparing for a possible escape. To her surprise, the buffalo showed no fear. On the contrary, he moved a few steps in the direction of the sound as if recognizing who was approaching. A low, melodious whistle cut the air, a signal that the animal seemed to understand. "Who's there?" Lauren asked, gathering courage, in her exhausted voice. "A friend," responded an elderly voice with the typical cadence of the region's long-time residents. "I see that Silverback found you, miss." Lauren felt a mixture of hope and distrust. "How do you know his name, and who are you?" "My name is Joe Bennett." The man approached slowly, allowing Silverback to smell him before coming closer. "I've been a guide here in the valley for longer than I like to remember, and I've known the stories about this big guy since I was a boy." There was something genuine in that man's voice that made Lauren relax a little. Silverback seemed to trust. Him and the animal had proven to be an excellent judge of character so far. "I need help," she finally said. "My shoulder is dislocated and there are people looking for me. Dangerous people." "I know, child," Joe's voice softened. "We're organizing a rescue group. Claire told us about the research project and the suspicions about Harrison Adams." "Claire?" Lauren felt a wave of relief. "She found the emails?" "Found everything. And brought Cowboys and Sheriff Lawrence to help us. They're on their way to the meeting point now." With Joe Bennett's help, Lauren carefully slid from Silverback's back. Her legs trembled from exhaustion and pain, but she remained firm, refusing to show weakness. "I need to tell what I discovered," she spoke, while Joe examined her shoulder with experienced hands. "I found a camp. There was evidence of other people. I think I'm not the first he's tried to eliminate." "This will hurt a bit, child," warned Joe, positioning his hands. With a quick and precise movement, he put Lauren's shoulder back, in place. Her scream briefly echoed before she could contain it, frightening some nearby birds. The acute pain gave way to immediate relief, although the discomfort persisted. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling involuntary tears run down her face. "Rest a bit. We have a few hours until the meeting point, and you need to recover your strength." Joe took a canteen from his backpack and offered water. "Meanwhile, tell me everything you discovered." Lauren needed no more encouragement. She reported every detail of her terrible experience: Harrison's invitation, the walk along the unknown trail, the push that almost cost her life, the miraculous rescue by Silverback, and the disturbing discoveries at the abandoned camp. "He mentioned that I wasn't the first," she concluded, "and the evidence I found confirms this. Children, perhaps. There was a child's bracelet." Joe Bennett remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the gravity of the information. "The valley holds many secrets," he finally said. "Some beautiful, like Silverback here, others terrible, made by men who think themselves above everything and everyone." The buffalo approached, lying heavily beside Lauren, offering his warmth against the night that was beginning to fall. She caressed the thick fur of the animal, feeling a connection that transcended rational explanations. "Why did he save me?" she asked, more to herself than to Joe. "My grandmother, who was Native American, said that Silverback is a protector," responded the old guide. "He appears to those who have an important purpose to fulfill, people whose journey should not yet end." Lauren reflected on these words as they rested. Night was rapidly advancing, bringing with it the chorus of crickets and the occasional hooting of owls. Somewhere in the valley, Harrison Adams and his men continued searching, perhaps already aware that she had survived and discovered too much. "We need to move," said Joe finally, consulting his old watch. "The group should be arriving at Black River soon." With renewed energy, Lauren allowed the old guide to help her climb again onto Silverback's back. Her shoulder, although still painful, now allowed limited movements. More importantly, her mind was clear and determined. "We can't simply run away," she declared, as they followed an almost invisible trail. "We need to gather enough evidence to end his project permanently." "First safety, then justice," advised Joe. "But don't worry. Sheriff Lawrence is not a man of half measures, and Claire is already organizing the evidence she found in the laboratory." As they advanced, The sounds of the forest seemed to conspire in their favor, creating a natural symphony that camouflaged their own noises. Silverback moved like a shadow among the trees, his impressive size contradicting his agility and silence. At one point, distant voices made the group stop. Joe signaled for them to remain still, while he silently advanced to check. "Harrison's men," he whispered upon returning. "3 of them, armed, checking every trail. We'll have to make a detour." The tension was palpable as they skirted the dangerous area. Lauren felt each beat of Silverback's heart beneath her hands, the powerful and constant rhythm transmitting a strange sense of security amid the danger. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound of running water announced they had reached Black River. Joe Bennett emitted a specific whistle, a melody that seemed part of the forest sounds. Seconds later, an identical whistle responded, coming from the opposite bank. "Our friends have arrived," he announced with evident relief in his voice. "Now we just need to cross the river and we'll be on safe ground." Silverback entered the water without hesitation, his massive body forming a barrier against the moderate current. Lauren felt the cold splashes on her skin, a reinvigorating sensation after so many hours of tension and pain. On the other bank, familiar voices called her name in enthusiastic whispers. A new chapter in her journey was about to begin, and this time, she would not be alone in the fight against Harrison Adams and his obscure plans. The cold water of Black River reached Silverback's chest as the animal advanced carefully, keeping Lauren safe on his back. On the opposite bank, 6 figures waited in silence. The only light came from a partially covered lantern to avoid attracting unwanted attention. "Lauren!" Claire's voice broke the silence as soon as they reached the bank. She ran to help her friend descend, her eyes widening upon seeing the researcher's condition. "My God, what did he do to you?" "Nothing that can't be fixed," responded Lauren, with a determination that surprised everyone. Her feet touched the firm ground of the bank, and she immediately oriented herself by the sounds and smells around, mentally mapping the position of each person present. Mike, the leader of the cowboys, approached with heavy steps. "Is this the blind woman who can perceive the world better than many people with good eyesight?" he asked with genuine respect in his deep voice. "And this is the legendary buffalo that everyone said didn't exist," completed a younger man, clearly impressed with Silverback, who was shaking himself to dry his fur after the crossing. "We'll have time for admirations later," interrupted a firm and authoritative voice. "We need to move. Harrison Adams has mobilized a private search team besides getting official support using his contacts in Washington, D.C. Lauren recognized the tone of command. "You must be Sheriff Lawrence." She extended her hand in the direction of the voice. "The same." He shook her hand with respectful firmness. "And I'm very interested in everything you've discovered about Project Lynx Eyes." One of the cowboys offered a dry jacket to Lauren, while another prepared strong coffee in a thermos. The group moved to a more protected area, under dense trees that formed a natural canopy, muffling sounds and hiding them from possible observers. "We don't have much time," said Lauren, accepting the cup of hot coffee with gratitude. "Harrison isn't just a corrupt businessman. He's involved in something much bigger, a systematized program to exploit people with extraordinary sensory abilities." "Tell everything you know," asked the sheriff, sitting on a stone in front of her. With precise details, Lauren narrated her gradual discovery about the true purpose of Harrison's interest in her research, how he had manipulated information, used his charm and position to gain her trust, only to try to silence her when he realized she wouldn't voluntarily collaborate with his plans. "The emails I found confirm everything," complimented Claire. "They're developing a training program based on Lauren's discoveries about neuroplasticity and sensory compensation. Basically, they want to create super soldiers with increased perception, capable of detecting threats that no technology can capture." "And that's not all," added Lauren, removing from her pocket the small soaked notebook she had found in the abandoned camp. "I managed to dry some pages. They're notes about tests with different subjects, adults, teenagers, even children with specific sensory deficiencies, all recruited for a supposed inclusive research program." The sheriff carefully leafed through the fragile pages, his face hardening with each line. "This is inhuman," completed Joe Bennett, his voice loaded with indignation. "Using vulnerable people as guinea pigs for military experiments." A heavy silence fell over the group. Only the night sounds of the valley filled the air, as each absorbed the gravity of the situation. "And there's more," continued Lauren, removing the small child's bracelet from her pocket. "I found this in the camp. By the size, it belonged to a child." Sheriff Lawrence examined the object with a somber expression. "I have reports of at least 3 unexplained disappearances in the region in the last 2 years," he revealed. "One of them, a 12-year-old girl with extraordinary hearing, capable of identifying sounds at distances impossible for ordinary people." "We need to act quickly," intervened Mike. "If this man discovers that Lauren is alive and has evidence against him, he'll mobilize all his power to silence her permanently. And not just me," added Lauren. "All of you would be in danger too." One of the younger cowboys, who until then had observed everything in silence, finally spoke. "I have a cousin in the Federal Bureau in Washington, D.C. We can contact him directly, without going through official channels that Harrison might control." "Great idea, Jack," agreed the sheriff, "but we need more than accusations. We need irrefutable proof." Claire rummaged in her backpack, removing a flash drive protected by a waterproof case. "I have copies of all emails, reports, and project documents," she explained, "including suspicious financial transfers to overseas accounts." "And we have a specific location to investigate," completed Lauren. "The camp where I found the evidence. If we could bring federal authorities there—" "But Harrison probably already ordered the place cleaned," pondered Joe Bennett. A strong snort interrupted the conversation. Silverback, who had been grazing quietly a few meters away, approached the group. The great buffalo seemed agitated, his ears moving in different directions, capturing distant sounds that the humans hadn't yet perceived. Lauren immediately understood the alert. "Someone's approaching," she informed, her trained hearing now, also picking up subtle sounds of movement in the forest. "Quick, put out the light," ordered the sheriff in a low voice. In the sudden darkness, the group moved urgently to a more protected position among the rocks. Silverback followed them silently, his enormous body surprisingly agile on the rugged terrain. Minutes later, beams of flashlights cut through the darkness on the other side of the river. Male voices discussed the best way to cross. Harrison's search group had found their trail. "They can't see us here," whispered Mike, "but soon they'll discover a point to cross." "We need to separate," decided Sheriff Lawrence. "Joe, do you know the trail to Howler Hill?" The old guide nodded in the penumbra. "I know it like the back of my hand. No outsider can follow that path without getting lost." "Perfect," the sheriff continued. "You, Lauren, and Claire go there with Silverback. It's the safest place until we can get reinforcements. Jack, you come with me to the Federal Highway Patrol Post on Route 20 to make contact with your cousin. Mike and the other cowboys, I need you to create a distraction. Lead these men away from the Howler Hill Trail." The plan was quickly accepted. In minutes, the group organized itself, distributing supplies and arranging alternative meeting points. Before departing, Lauren held the sheriff's hands. "Be careful. Harrison isn't just dangerous, he has powerful connections." "Justice has long arms, Dr. Lauren," responded Lawrence with determination. "And in this valley, the only law that will prevail is the one that protects our people." The group divided silently in the darkness. The cowboys, led by Mike, headed south, purposely creating visible tracks and enough noise to attract the attention of the pursuers. The sheriff and Jack headed east toward the highway, and Lauren, guided by Joe Bennett and accompanied by Claire and the faithful Silverback, began the climb up the almost invisible trail to Howler Hill. The night in the valley covered their movements like a protective cloak, while the crescent moon provided just enough light for them not to stumble on the stones of the path. A new phase of the battle against Harrison Adams had begun. The dawn advanced slowly at Howler Hill, one of the most isolated and inaccessible points in Silveridge Valley. The trail that Joe Bennett followed confidently could hardly be called a path. It was more a succession of natural landmarks that only true connoisseurs of the region could interpret. "How did you learn to navigate here?" asked Claire, breathless after another steep climb. My grandfather brought me here for the first time when I was 8, responded the old guide, helping her to maneuver around a slippery rock. He said it was a sacred path, used by the ancients for special ceremonies. Long before tourists and businessmen discovered the valley, Lauren, mounted on Silverback, remained strangely silent. Her senses were totally focused on the environment around, capturing every nuance of the night. The air became more rarefied as they climbed, bringing a different smell, mineral, pure, with subtle touches of night flowers that only bloomed at high altitudes. "We're arriving," she finally announced, surprising even Joe Bennett with her precision. "The wind has changed direction and the rock here has a different composition. I feel the echo of our movement returning faster, which suggests an open area ahead." The old guide smiled in the dark. "Impressive, Doctor. We are indeed a few meters from the Howler Hill Plateau. It's a protected location with a view of the entire valley, but invisible to anyone looking from below." Moments later, the group emerged in a relatively flat area at the top of the hill. It was a natural amphitheater, surrounded by rock formations that offered protection against the wind and distant gazes. A small spring bubbled between the stones, providing crystalline water that shimmered under the moonlight. "We can rest here," decided Joe, removing from his backpack a small tarp that he quickly extended as an improvised shelter. "From here we can see any suspicious movement down below, but nobody can spot us." Silverback found a comfortable place to lie down, and Lauren carefully slid from his back. Despite the relocated shoulder, her entire body ached from the long journey. Claire immediately came to her aid, helping her to settle under the shelter. "We need to check your injuries," she said, taking out a small first aid kit from her backpack. While Claire tended to Lauren's cuts and abrasions, Joe Bennett prepared an herbal tea that he had gathered along the way. The comforting aroma spread through the air, bringing a moment of normalcy amid the extreme situation. "Why did Harrison choose Silveridge Valley for his project?" Lauren suddenly asked, breaking the silence. "Of all the remote places in America, why here?" Joe Bennett sipped some tea before answering. "The valley has always been a place of special energy. The elders said that the quartz crystals under the soil create a unique magnetic field. Many come seeking cure or spiritual enlightenment." "Or perfect isolation for illegal experiments," completed Claire bitterly. "Reviewing the project documents, I noticed a pattern. They seek remote areas but with specific geological characteristics for their tests." "The crystals," murmured Lauren, a sudden understanding, illuminating her face. "My God, how didn't I realize before?" "What is it?" asked Joe and Claire almost simultaneously. "My research on expanded sensory perception showed that certain natural magnetic fields can potentiate extrasensory abilities in people with already heightened senses," explained Lauren, her scientific mind working at full speed. "That's why some blind people report almost supernatural perception experiences in certain locations, but not in others. And Silveridge Valley has the largest concentration of quartz crystals on the planet," completed Claire, comprehending the magnitude of the discovery. "Exactly. Harrison isn't just exploiting vulnerable people to create surveillance technology. He's utilizing specific geological characteristics to amplify these abilities to levels never before documented." Lauren breathed deeply, processing the implications. "It's much more dangerous than we imagined." Joe Bennett observed the distant horizon, where the first rays of dawn began to appear. "That explains many of the local legends," he commented thoughtfully. "Stories about people who developed extraordinary capabilities after spending time in specific caves in the valley. And it explains Silverback," added Lauren softly, extending her hand to caress the buffalo resting nearby. "Isn't that right, friend?" The great animal moved his head in her direction, as if understanding. His eyes, deep and expressive, seemed to contain an ancestral wisdom that transcended human comprehension. "What do you mean?" asked Claire, confused. "I have a theory," Lauren smiled, "but it sounds so fantastic that I'm almost ashamed to share it. After everything we've experienced in the last few hours, I think we can handle a bit more of the extraordinary," encouraged Joe. Lauren breathed deeply before continuing. "I think Silverback isn't just an ordinary buffalo that developed a special connection with humans," she began. "I believe he might be. Something more. Perhaps the result of a previous experiment, or perhaps something that has always existed in these fields, manifesting in ways that our science doesn't yet completely understand. A contemplative silence followed this declaration. Nobody laughed or ridiculed the theory. After everything they had witnessed, the boundaries between possible and impossible seemed thinner than ever. The sun finally appeared on the horizon, bathing the plateau in golden light. In the new day that was born, important decisions would need to be made. Sheriff Lawrence should have reached the highway by now, calculated Joe, consulting his old watch. If everything went well, reinforcements will be on the way in a few hours. We can't just wait, decided Lauren, rising with renewed determination. Harrison has probably realized that I survived and that I have evidence against him. He'll try to destroy any remaining proof and disappear. What do you suggest? Asked Claire, concerned with the intense gleam in her friend's eyes. We need to go back to the camp I found, responded Lauren. If we can properly document the site before it's cleaned, we'll have irrefutable physical evidence to complement the digital documents. Joe Bennett frowned, considering the risks. It's dangerous. Harrison's men are all over the valley. That's exactly why we need you, Joe, Lauren smiled. You know paths they would never find, and we have Silverback. As if understanding he was being mentioned, the great buffalo rose, shaking his fur still damp from the morning dew. His posture conveyed strength and willingness. After briefly debating, the group agreed on a risky but potentially decisive plan. They would use an even more remote path, known only to Joe Bennett, to reach the camp without being detected. Claire would document everything with her cell phone camera, while Lauren would identify evidence that others might overlook. If we can do this and return in time to meet the sheriff with the federal reinforcements, Harrison will have no way to escape, concluded Lauren, her face illuminated not only by the rising sun but by an unwavering determination. As they prepared to depart, Joe Bennett observed the way Silverback always remained close to Lauren, as if determined to protect her at any cost. You know, commented the old guide, the legend says that Silverback only appears to very special people. People destined to change the course of things. Lauren smiled, caressing the buffalo's muzzle. Then let's honor that trust, she simply responded, and change the course of this story. 3 months had passed since the dramatic events in Silveridge Valley. A golden autumn afternoon bathed the small stone house at the edge of the village with soft light. Recently renovated, the building displayed an engraved wooden sign at the entrance. Silverback Refuge, Sensory Development Center. In the spacious, grassy yard, Lauren was conducting a training session with 5 children. 3 of them were blind. One had hearing impairment, and the last, a girl of approximately 12 years old, possessed a rare spectrum of synesthesia that allowed her to see sounds as vibrant colors. Focus not on what's missing, but on what you have that's extraordinary, Lauren guided, walking with ease among the little ones. Michael, can you identify where the sound is coming from? A boy of about 10 years old slowly turned his head, processing the auditory stimuli. From beside the mulberry tree, he responded confidently. It's a hummingbird, Professor Lauren. Perfect, she smiled, proud. And you, Caroline, can you feel the difference between these 2 samples? The girl with synesthesia carefully touched 2 apparently identical rocks. This one produces a blue-greenish sound when touched, she responded, holding the first stone. And this other one, a vibrant yellow, almost golden. They're different crystals. Observing the scene from the porch, Claire smiled while serving fresh lemonade to Sheriff Lawrence and Joe Bennett, who were resting in rustic chairs after a long meeting. It's amazing what she managed to build in such a short time, commented the sheriff, accepting the glass with gratitude. From victim to heroine and now mentor, Lauren always had this ability to transform adversity into strength, responded Claire. Since I've known her in college, she saw possibilities where others saw only limitations. Joe Bennett observed the horizon, where the sun was beginning its descent behind the rocky formations of the valley. His wrinkled face displayed an expression of serene contentment. The news from Washington, D.C. arrived today, commented the sheriff, lowering his voice. Harrison Adams has been formally charged by the federal prosecutor's office. Besides the attempted murder charges against Lauren, he'll answer for human trafficking illegal experiments, criminal association, and a list of crimes that will guarantee many years of imprisonment. And the politicians and military personnel involved? Asked Claire, sitting down to join the conversation. Some have already been removed from their positions, responded Lawrence. Others are being investigated. The network was larger than we initially imagined. The evidence they had collected on that risky day, returning to the secret camp, proved decisive. They not only confirmed the suspicions about Project Lynx Eyes, but revealed connections with similar operations in other countries, configuring an international conspiracy to exploit people with extraordinary sensory abilities. I heard they found 3 more locations like that camp, commented Joe Bennett, and managed to rescue some of the missing children. 5 of them so far, confirmed the sheriff. 2 are here at the Silverback Refuge, including the girl with the bracelet that Lauren found. Caroline, the girl with synesthesia, was precisely the owner of that child's bracelet that had become a key piece of the investigation. Rescued from a clandestine center in the Everglades, she initially wouldn't speak, traumatized by the months of experiments she had been subjected to. It was Lauren who managed to break her silence, communicating with her through sensory associations that respected her unique way of perceiving the world. The session in the yard ended, and the children ran for a snack prepared by Mrs. Julie, a lady from the village who now worked as a cook at the refuge. Lauren walked slowly to the porch, her face radiant with satisfaction. "They're evolving incredibly fast," she commented, accepting a glass of lemonade. "Michael can already identify birds by the beating of their wings, something that took me years to learn." "It's because they have you as an example," responded Claire with affection, "and a safe environment to develop their talents." Lauren smiled, instinctively touching the small buffalo-shaped pendant she now always carried on her neck. It was a delicate silver sculpture, created by a local artisan as a thank-you gift for what she had done for the community. "We had news from the Scientific Commission," she informed the group. "My methodology was unanimously approved. Starting next semester, we'll have federal funding to expand the program to other states." "A genuinely ethical sensory studies center," commented Sheriff Lawrence. "Using knowledge to include, not to exploit. That's quite a turnaround." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of heavy hooves approaching. An immediate smile illuminated Lauren's face, who stood up even before the others could clearly hear the approach. "He's coming," she simply announced. From the trail leading to the forest emerged the imposing figure of Silverback. The great buffalo walked with its usual majesty, its powerful horns gleaming in the setting sun. The children, upon seeing him, ran animatedly in his direction. "Calm down one at a time," warned Lauren, laughing. "He likes attention, but you need to respect him." The phenomenon had become part of the village routine. Silverback appeared regularly, always at dusk, visiting the refuge for a few hours before returning to the depths of the valley. Nobody tried to imprison or domesticate him. He was a respected visitor, almost sacred for the local residents. "I still wonder what he really is," commented Claire, watching the children carefully caress the buffalo's fur, who seemed to appreciate the attention. "Perhaps some things don't need to be completely understood to be appreciated," responded Joe Bennett philosophically. "The valley holds many mysteries." Lauren approached Silverback, who immediately turned his head in her direction. There was, between them, a connection that transcended conventional explanations. She placed her hand on the animal's muzzle, a gesture of complicity established since that first extraordinary encounter. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. The sun cast its last rays when the group gathered for dinner at the large wooden table on the terrace. It was a scene of perfect harmony. Researchers, police officers, local residents, and children with extraordinary abilities sharing stories and laughter. Silverback rested peacefully on the nearby grass, like a silent guardian. After the meal, Lauren was invited to speak about the future plans of the refuge. Standing up, she touched the buffalo pendant again, as if seeking inspiration. "What happened here wasn't just a victory against ill-intentioned people," she began. "It was an awakening to a new understanding of our human capabilities. For a long time we saw disabilities as limitations to be overcome. Today we understand that they are doors to different and equally valuable perceptions of the world." She paused, Her face turned toward the starry sky that was beginning to reveal itself. The Silverback Refuge isn't just a rehabilitation or research center. It's a place where we celebrate sensory diversity as a richness of human experience. Each of us perceives the world in a unique way, and it's in this multiplicity of perspectives that we find our greatest strength. Caroline, the girl with the bracelet, timidly approached Lauren and held her hand. "Professor," she whispered, "can I show what I prepared?" With an encouraging smile, Lauren nodded. The girl walked to the center of the terrace and, to everyone's surprise, began to sing. Her crystalline voice rose in the night, intoning a traditional melody of the valley. But the truly extraordinary was what happened while she sang. Her hands moved in the air, as if painting the colors that only she could see emanating from her own voice. It was a visual manifestation of her synesthesia, transformed into art through the encouragement received at the refuge. When she finished, tears of emotion shone in many eyes. "This is what we've built here," concluded Lauren, embracing the girl, "a place where differences are not just accepted, but celebrated as precious gifts." Later, when most had retired, Lauren remained on the terrace, feeling the night breeze of the valley. Silverback approached silently, his enormous body moving with surprising delicacy. "I'll never be able to thank you enough," she spoke softly, caressing the thick fur of the animal. "You not only saved my life, you helped discover my true purpose." The buffalo snorted softly as if understanding. His intelligent eyes reflected the stars in the valley sky, that same sky that had witnessed so many mysteries over the centuries. "Wherever you go, whatever your true nature, there will always be a place for you here," promised Lauren. "The Silverback Refuge will always be your home too." In response, the great animal inclined his head, gently touching Lauren's shoulder with his moist muzzle, the same shoulder that had been injured on that fateful day, now completely healed. It was a gesture of temporary farewell, a ritual that repeated itself with each visit. Moments later, Silverback silently moved away, his imposing silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Tomorrow there would be more. Children to teach, more research to conduct, more lives to transform, and at dusk, the guardian of the valley would return, keeping alive the legend that was now an integral part of the story of all of them. Lauren breathed deeply the pure night air, feeling more complete than ever before. The darkness that had once frightened her was now just another form of light, an understanding that she hoped to share with the world through the work of the Silverback Refuge. Somewhere in the vastness of the valley, the deep and profound sound of a buffalo echoed like a promise. The journey had just begun.